She died a year ago. I was at her funeral. But this morning I received a letter from her, help me. I'm alive. I'm Private Detective Tom Spencer. In this line of work, you quickly get used to oddities, but this case knocked me off balance. A year ago, Ellie Reeves, a 26-year-old teacher, died in a car accident. Her car plunged off a bridge, they recovered her body from the water, and the funeral was held 3 days later. Period. But this morning, there was an envelope in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Inside, a note. Tom, if you're reading this, it means I found a way to reach you. They're lying. I'm alive. Help me. I read it about 10 times. The handwriting was hers. I remembered those letters. She had once hired me to investigate a theft at her home. The first thing I did was drive to the cemetery. Ellie's grave was still there. The plaque, flowers. The ground seemed undisturbed. But something wasn't right. I returned to my car and heard a whisper. I turned around. The cemetery was empty. My next stop was her parents' house. Her mother opened the door, pale, exhausted. Sorry to bother you, I began. This will sound strange, but I received a letter, from Ellie. The woman froze. You, too? She silently went into another room and returned with an envelope. The same handwriting. The same words. They had been receiving these letters for 3 weeks. We thought someone was just playing with us, but the handwriting. I left the house, trying to piece together the puzzle. If Ellie was dead, who was sending the letters? I checked her case in the police archives. The officer's report, the coroner's report, photos of the car. And one detail that bothered me. The body was identified by her parents. But the medical examiner didn't do a DNA analysis. Why? I went to the detective who handled the case. Everything was obvious, he shrugged. Wrecked car, body in the water, documents in place. We verified the appearance, parents confirmed. DNA. There was no need. I left the station with my heart pounding wildly. What if it wasn't her body? I decided to check the surveillance camera footage from the night of the accident. The traffic camera near the bridge. The recording shows her car passing the intersection. But Ellie wasn't driving. The driver was a man. And next to him, in the passenger seat, sat Ellie. Alive. What happened next? Was Ellie kidnapped? Or did she stage her own death? I rewound the footage, watching it again. The timestamp read 11:42 p.m., just minutes before the reported accident. The man driving her car wore a baseball cap pulled low, obscuring his face from the camera. Ellie sat beside him, looking straight ahead, her posture rigid. No signs of struggle, but something about her stillness bothered me. Back in my office, I spread out everything I had. Photos from the accident scene showed Ellie's blue Honda Civic crumpled against the rocks below Westlake Bridge, half submerged in the murky waters of the Mill Creek River. The driver's side door was open, as if someone had escaped. The passenger door remained closed, presumably with Ellie inside. I pulled out my phone and called Dr. Lorraine Hayes, a pathologist I'd worked with on previous cases. Tom Spencer, she said, recognizing my number. It's been months. Let me guess, you need something unseemly. Information about a death certificate. Ellie Reeves, car accident, last March. The line went quiet. Give me a minute. I could hear keyboard clicks in the background. My fingers drummed nervously against my desk. Interesting, she finally said. Death certificate signed by Dr. Marcus Webb. Not one of our regulars. Cause of death, drowning following trauma from vehicular accident. Any peculiarities? A pause. The report notes severe facial trauma and water damage making visual identification difficult. Parents identified her by a birthmark on her shoulder and a scar on her left hand. What about dental records? Nothing here about dental comparison. Just visual ID and personal effects. I thanked her and hung up, my unease growing. Webb wasn't a regular medical examiner. Facial trauma conveniently making identification challenging. I needed to find this Dr. Webb. It took 3 hours of calls and a visit to the county medical examiner's office to learn that Dr. Marcus Webb had been a visiting pathologist, filling in for 2 weeks while their regular me was on medical leave. He'd left no forwarding contact information, and nobody seemed to know much about him. He came highly recommended, the office administrator told me with a shrug. Handled 4 cases, filed perfect paperwork, then moved on. Some doctors prefer the locum lifestyle, higher pay, no commitments. My next stop was Ellie's apartment building, now occupied by new tenants. The landlord, a heavy-set man named Jerry, recognized me from when I'd helped Ellie with the theft case. "Terrible thing, what happened to her," he said, shaking his head. "Such a sweet girl. Always paid rent on time. Did she have any visitors in the weeks before the accident? Anyone unusual?" He scratched his chin. "Now that you mention it, there was a man who came by several times. Professorish type. Glasses, tweed jacket even in warm weather. I assumed he was a colleague from school. Did you ever get his name?" "No, but..." He hesitated. "The week before she died, I heard them arguing. She was telling him to leave her alone. Said something like, 'I won't help you anymore.'" Interesting. Ellie was a 6th grade English teacher at Westridge Elementary. What could a professorish man want from her? I made my way to the school, a sprawling brick building surrounded by maple trees just beginning to turn golden in the early fall air. The principal, a stern woman named Barbara Winters, sat behind a large desk cluttered with student artwork and administrative paperwork. "Ellie was one of our best," she said, eyes softening at the mention of her former teacher. "The children adored her. She had a way of making even the most reluctant readers fall in love with books." "Did she ever mention any problems? Anyone bothering her?" Principal Winters frowned. "Not to me. But..." She paused, seeming to debate whether to continue. "About 2 months before the accident, she requested a week of emergency personal leave. When she returned, she seemed different. More guarded. I asked if everything was all right, and she insisted it was just family matters. Any unusual visitors at the school? Someone who might stand out, older man, academic type?" Her eyes widened slightly. "Yes, actually. A man came by asking for her about a month before she died. Said he was consulting with her on a research project. I remember thinking it was odd. Ellie taught elementary school, not college. Did you get his name?" "Dr. Whitman, I believe. He left a business card." She rummaged through a drawer. "I might still have it somewhere. Teachers sometimes collaborate with researchers, so I kept it in case others were interested." After a few minutes of searching, she produced a slightly bent business card, Dr. James Whitman, historical research consultant. The only contact information was an email address, truhistorical@mailnet.com. I slipped the card into my pocket. One more thing, did Ellie have any close friends on staff? Someone she might have confided in? Principal Winters directed me to Megan Torres, who taught in the classroom next to Ellie's. I found her supervising recess, a petite woman with curly hair pulled back in a ponytail, watching the children with sharp eyes. When I introduced myself and mentioned Ellie, her expression darkened. "Something wasn't right," she said quietly, keeping her eyes on the playground. "About 2 weeks before it happened, Ellie asked me a strange question. She wanted to know if I thought it was possible to completely disappear, to start over somewhere new where nobody could find you." My pulse quickened. "What did you tell her?" "I thought she was just burned out. Teaching can be exhausting. I told her to take a vacation first before making any drastic decisions. Megan's voice cracked. If I'd known she was in real trouble. Did she ever mention a Dr. Whitman? Or any research project she was working on? Megan frowned. No, but she did mention finding something in her grandmother's attic. Some old letters or journals. She was excited about it, said it might be historically significant. I thanked her and headed back to my car, puzzling over this new information. Ellie had found something valuable enough that someone posing as a historical researcher had taken interest. Something worth threatening her over. Something worth killing for. I drove to my office, the pieces refusing to fit together. Why stage Ellie's death? If she had found something valuable, why not just take it? Unless she had hidden it. Unless she was the only one who knew where it was. I picked up my phone and dialed the Reeves number. Mrs. Reeves answered on the third ring, her voice wary. Mr. Spencer. Have you learned something? I need to ask about Ellie's grandmother. Did she leave Ellie anything? Letters, journals, anything of historical value? The silence stretched for several seconds. How did you know about that? She finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What exactly did she inherit? Margaret, Ellie's grandmother, died about 3 months before the accident. She left Ellie her old house in Pinecrest and everything in it. Ellie spent weekends there, sorting through everything. Mrs. Reeves paused. About 6 weeks before she died, Ellie called us, excited about something she'd found in the attic. She wouldn't say exactly what it was, just that it was historically significant and she needed to research it further. Did she ever tell you what it was? No. The last time we spoke about it, she seemed nervous. Said she needed to be careful about who she trusted. Her voice broke. I should have pressed her more. Maybe if I had. Is the house still in the family? Yes. We couldn't bear to sell it. It's just sitting there, empty. 20 minutes later, I was driving toward Pinecrest, a small town about 40 miles north of the city. The grandmother's house was a Victorian-era 2-story with peeling blue paint and a wraparound porch. I found the spare key where Mrs. Reeves said it would be, under a planter shaped like a garden gnome. The house smelled of dust and old wood. Sheets draped over the furniture gave the rooms a ghostly appearance. I made my way upstairs to the attic, the wooden steps creaking under my weight. The attic was surprisingly organized, boxes labeled in what I recognized as Ellie's handwriting, kitchen, books, family photos. Nothing labeled historically significant discovery. I spent an hour searching through boxes, finding nothing unusual, until I noticed something off about the wooden flooring. One section didn't match the wear pattern of the rest. I knelt down, running my fingers along the edges of the boards, and found a subtle seam. A hidden compartment. It took some effort, but I managed to pry it open. Inside was a metal box, locked with a simple latch. I broke it open. The box contained a leather-bound journal, yellowed with age, and a small cloth bag. The journal was written in what appeared to be coded entries, columns of numbers and letters in no language I recognized. The cloth bag held an unusual medallion, bronze, about 2 inches in diameter, engraved with complex geometric patterns surrounding a central symbol that looked like a stylized eye. I was photographing these items with my phone when I heard a floorboard creak downstairs. Someone else was in the house. I quietly closed the metal box and slipped it into my jacket, then moved toward the attic stairs. The sound of methodical movement came from below, someone searching, room by room. I ducked behind a stack of boxes as footsteps started up the stairs. Through a small gap, I could see a man's legs ascending. Black pants, expensive shoes. Not a random burglar. He reached the top of the stairs, tall, lean, with silver-streaked dark hair and wire-rimmed glasses. Dr. Whitman, I presumed. He scanned the attic, his gaze clinical and calculating. My phone, silenced but still in camera mode, chose that moment to flash as it tried to focus in the dim light. His head snapped toward my hiding spot. "I know you're there," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "You must be the detective Mrs. Reeves mentioned." I stood slowly, keeping my hands visible but ready to reach for the gun holstered under my jacket. "And you must be Dr. Whitman. Funny, you weren't at Ellie's funeral, yet here you are searching her grandmother's house." He smiled thinly. "I'm simply pursuing historical artifacts of significance. The Harrington collection would be incomplete without Margaret Reeves' contribution." Harrington collection? A private museum of sorts. He took a step forward, eyes darting around the attic. Ms. Reeves had agreed to sell her grandmother's findings to us before her unfortunate accident. "That's not what I heard. Witnesses say she told you to leave her alone." His smile faltered. "A negotiation tactic, nothing more. She was driving up the price." His gaze sharpened. "Have you found anything interesting, detective? Perhaps we could come to an arrangement. I'm not in the business of selling other people's property." "Everything has its price," he said softly. "Ellie discovered that too late." A chill ran down my spine. "Are you admitting to something, Doctor?" He laughed, the sound echoing unnaturally in the dusty attic. "Only that people often don't realize the value of what they possess until it's too late. Now, I'll ask politely once, if you found Margaret's journal and the medallion, I'm prepared to offer you $50,000. Right now." I kept my expression neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about." His eyes hardened. "Don't play games, Mr. Spencer. The journal contains research that belongs to our organization. The medallion is simply a trinket, but we'd like to keep the collection intact." "What organization would that be? And what's so special about an old journal?" Instead of answering, he reached inside his jacket. My hand moved to my gun, but he merely produced a business card, a different one than he'd given the principal. This one was heavy stock, cream-colored, embossed with a symbol matching the medallions I design. "The Helios Foundation," it read, with an address in Washington, D.C. "Call this number when you're ready to be reasonable," he said, placing the card on a nearby box. "The offer won't last forever. Neither will you if you had anything to do with Ellie's death." His expression didn't change. "Accidents happen, Mr. Spencer. Especially to people who meddle in matters beyond their comprehension." He backed toward the stairs. "I'll show myself out." I let him go, knowing confrontation now would be premature. I needed more information first. As his footsteps faded, I pulled out the metal box again, examining the journal more closely. Though the writing was coded, some pages contained diagrams, star charts, mathematical equations, and what appeared to be maps of underground locations. Tucked in the back was a faded photograph, 5 people in 1940s attire, standing before a stone archway. On the back, written in faded ink, "First Breakthrough, 1947. Crawford, Harrington, Reeves, Sullivan, Webb." Webb. The same surname as the medical examiner who'd signed Ellie's death certificate. I photographed everything, then replaced the box in its hiding spot. As I drove back to the city, my mind raced. What had Ellie discovered? Something valuable enough to kill for, clearly, but what? Back at my office, I researched the Helios Foundation. Their website was minimal, a scientific research organization founded in 1946, focused on expanding the boundaries of human knowledge. No specific projects listed, no team members, just an application form for research grants that required extensive personal information and credentials. I dug deeper, searching academic databases and news archives. The foundation appeared sporadically as a footnote, funding archaeological digs in Egypt, astronomical observatories in Chile, quantum physics research in Switzerland. Always on the periphery, never in the spotlight. A knock at my door interrupted my research. I checked the peephole before opening it, a habit that's saved my life more than once. Standing in the hallway was a woman with short red hair and familiar green eyes. Eyes I'd seen in photographs, at a funeral, on a gravestone. Ellie Reeves. My hand instinctively moved toward my gun. "Please," she said quickly, raising her palms. "I'm not here to hurt you. I need your help." I stepped back, allowing her into my office while keeping a safe distance. She looked different, thinner, hair cut short and dyed red, dark circles under her eyes, but it was unmistakably her. "You're supposed to be dead," I said, stating the obvious. "I know." She glanced nervously at the windows. "Can we close the blinds? I can't risk being seen." I obliged, then gestured to a chair opposite my desk. "Start talking. Who was in your car that night? Whose body did they bury?" She sat, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "His name was David Webb. Dr. Whitman's assistant. He was helping me escape." "Escape from what?" "The Helios Foundation." She leaned forward. "They're not what they claim to be. My grandmother was one of their original researchers, a mathematician who specialized in theoretical physics. She left when she discovered what they were really doing." "Which is?" Ellie's eyes darted around the room, as if expecting to find listening devices. "Have you heard of the Philadelphia experiment?" I frowned. "The conspiracy theory about the Navy teleporting a destroyer during World War II? That's just urban legend. That's the sanitized public version." She pulled a flash drive from her pocket and placed it on my desk. "The truth is, they were experimenting with something far more dangerous than teleportation. Temporal displacement. Time travel," I said flatly. "Not exactly. More like, punching holes between moments in time. Creating bridges." She tapped the flash drive. "My grandmother was developing the mathematical framework. When she realized they were actually succeeding, and the dangers it posed, she stole key research and went into hiding. And you found this research in her attic." She nodded. "The journal contains equations that make Einstein's work look elementary. The medallion is a calibration device, it helps locate natural weak points in the temporal field." I leaned back in my chair, trying to process what she was saying. It sounded insane, yet her fear was palpable and genuine. "So you faked your death to escape these people? That still doesn't explain whose body they found." Pain flashed across her face. "David was helping me disappear. We staged the accident, but someone was following us. They forced us off the bridge. I managed to get out, but David." She closed her eyes. "The impact killed him instantly. I had to swim away and hide. When I heard they identified the body as mine, I realized it was my chance to disappear for good. Why come back now? Why risk exposing yourself? Because they're getting close to a functional prototype. If they succeed..." She shuddered. "The models show catastrophic consequences. Temporal fracturing on a global scale. And you expect me to believe this?" She reached for the flash drive. "See for yourself. It contains my grandmother's research, plus files I accessed from their servers before I fled. Including test footage." I connected the drive to my computer and opened the first video file. The footage showed a sterile laboratory where scientists surrounded what looked like a metal archway. Energy crackled around the frame, and for a brief moment, the air within the arch rippled. Like looking through heat waves, but more structured, more deliberate. Then something emerged. Something that shouldn't exist, a creature with too many limbs, moving in ways that hurt my eyes to follow. The video cut out as alarms began blaring. "What the hell was that?" I whispered. "They call it a traveler. It came through from somewhere else. Another time, another reality, they're not sure." Ellie's voice was hollow. 3 researchers died before they contained it. I scrolled through other files, mathematical equations far beyond my comprehension, internal memos discussing acceptable casualties and necessary sacrifices for progress. The accident report, Ellie said, pointing to a folder icon. David wasn't the first assistant to die conveniently. The folder contained personnel files for 8 researchers, all listed as deceased due to various accidents. All had worked directly under Dr. James Whitman. "They're cleaning house," I said. "Eliminating anyone who knows too much." Ellie nodded grimly. "My grandmother warned me." She coded her most dangerous discoveries, hoping they'd never be deciphered. But Whitman is close to cracking it, and once he does. Why not go to the authorities? With what evidence? Theoretical physics equations and a video that looks like it could be faked. Besides, the Foundation has connections in government. High-level connections. She leaned forward. "My parents received another letter yesterday. Saying I might be alive, saying they should tell me to return what I took, if they ever wanted to see me again." "Whitman's trying to flush you out." "Yes. And I can't keep hiding forever." Her eyes locked with mine. "I need someone to help me expose them, someone they don't know is connected to me. I need your help, Tom." I studied her face, searching for deception. "I found the journal and medallion today. Whitman was there." Her face paled. "Did he get them?" "No, I hid them again. But he offered me $50,000 for them." "They're worth far more than money," she whispered. "They're worth the stability of our reality." I made my decision. "Tomorrow, I'll retrieve them and move them somewhere safer. Then we start building a case, something concrete enough that even their connections can't bury it." "There isn't much time. The equinox is in 3 days." "What happens at the equinox?" "Temporal thin points. Moments when the barriers between times are naturally weaker. The Foundation has been working toward this particular equinox for decades. If they have a working prototype by then." She didn't need to finish. The implications were clear in her haunted expression. I stood, grabbing my car keys. "We should move somewhere safer. My apartment has good security, and no one would think to look for you there." As we headed to the door, my phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number: "Tell Ellie her time is running out." Quite literally. JW. I showed her the screen. "He knows I'm with you," she whispered, fear cracking her voice. "Then we don't have a moment to waste," I replied, ushering her toward the emergency stairs. "We're going to need help, trustworthy help." As we descended the stairs, the overhead lights flickered. Just for a second, but enough to make us both freeze. "Is that?" I began. "A temporal fluctuation. Small, but noticeable." Ellie's voice was tight with fear. "They've already started preliminary tests." Outside in the darkening evening, we hurried to my car. The streetlights pulsed strangely, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw something impossible, a shadow moving against the current of time, leaving visual echoes in the air. I blinked, and it was gone. "What do we do now?" I asked as we pulled away from the curb. Ellie clutched the flash drive tightly in her palm. "We fight back. Before time itself runs out." The streetlights continued to flicker behind us, as if reality itself was struggling to hold together.